Welcome to Lynn's Romance Library. I'm Lynn, and today we're doing the October wrap-up. So, I read a lot more this month than I typically do. I will say I got a couple of Halloween-ish, paranormal-ish novellas in. So that did help me boost my numbers a little bit. So I was in kind of just a novella mood. I had a lot of work stuff happening, so I really just wanted to have like little short stories. It's still over 100 pages generally, but shorter novels and novellas to kind of help me bolster. So, very exciting. I had 17 books and I read 7 of them primarily through audio. So I read 2 contemporaries, or primarily contemporary elements. Oh gosh, a lot of paranormal, 4 historical settings and 2 fantasy settings. Okay, so of those, I primarily had 5 stars. I had 7 5 stars, 5 4.5 stars, 5 4 stars, and then a 3 star. So the 3 star was a bit of a disappointment because I kind of was hoping I would like it, but it was also a bit of a step out of my normal realm. So I was definitely hesitant. So a little preview. My favorites of the month were Hearts and Darkness and Love in the Light by Laura Kaye, Tempting Auzed and Using Fejo by Victoria Aveline, Screaming Sins by R. O'Leary, Temptation of a Highlander by Elisa Braden, and After Midnight by Teresa Medeiros. Okay, so I do these in order from read at the beginning of the month to read most recently. It is October 31st at 6 p.m. So I technically do still have about 4 hours before our bedtime where I could pick up something and finish it technically, but chances are this is the end. If I don't cover something for whatever reason, I will roll it over to November. So first up is Screaming Sins by R. O'Leary. This is a book 7 in the Raven Falls series. So Raven Falls is this paranormal town comprised primarily of werewolves, general shifters, ghouls, banshees. Took me way too long. And I think maybe one other paranormal group, maybe not. But our heroine of this is a banshee, so she doesn't speak and she hasn't spoken ever. She runs the coffee shop and sandwich shop where the council with the leaders of each paranormal subspecies meets, and she's very pissed because her adoptive dad or adoptive uncle really has kind of convinced her that this would be like a great thing to do, and she's very annoyed by this barrier in her life and the trouble that hosting these meetings bring. But on the other hand, she loves being in the know and hearing all the gossip. She is purposely mute because she is a banshee. If she speaks or makes sounds, then those sounds can drive people mad and cause them to harm themselves. So she does communicate both with notes and ASL, and our hero is a hacker. He is the brother of book 2's the heroine from book 2's brother. He gets brought in as a hacker to help, and he kind of gets brought into the fold as kind of a helper. He and the heroine from book 2 grew up in a cult, and their closest neighbor was a banshee. And so they grew up communicating with this neighbor using sign language. And so it's their romance. He basically gets tasked to help find our big bad. And he is very intrigued by our heroine and basically forces her to have him set up shop in his cafe. And he drags her on various outings to get her out and try and get her to fall in love with him. There is elements of fated mates, but our hero is human and our heroine is a banshee, so it's not the very typical heavy-handed fated mates, but there is this very nice like balance and this kind of connection between our two characters that I just really enjoy in our O'Leary's world. It's going to be a while before the next book comes out, so I probably am going to try picking up one of their other series sometime soon. I think they also write alien romance, which I would be down for. Then as I said, that was one of my favorites of the month. And then I did the audiobook of The Temptation of a Highlander by Elisa Braden. This is book 3 in the Highland something or another series. They can be read as standalones, but there's a lot of enjoyment to be had in reading them in order, and there's a lot of layers, and it just gets better and better. So I would highly, highly, highly suggest starting at the beginning. There is some fantastical elements that get pulled in, some paranormal elements that get pulled in with the sight and other means of kind of, foresight and stuff like that. So very much enjoyed it. Our heroine is best friends with our heroine from book 2, and she gets an invitation to spend the holidays with our heroine from book 2. I do not remember any of these characters' names, so we're just going with, besides the point. Our heroine from this book has had a couple seasons. I think she's on number 7 or something, and so she's an older historical heroine. She's in her late 20s and she wasn't in style, and so her first couple seasons she was a wallflower, didn't really want to get involved in anything, and then she gets a couple of friends and she ends up starting taking ballet and dance, and through the course of finding this hobby that she really enjoys, dancing, she's able to kind of get fit and lose a little bit of weight. And so when her next season runs around, she's much more fashionable and she's able to make a better splash into the season, and she gets a lot more admirers, and her primary admirer ends up being a dangerous stalker. Not the fun kind of stalker, it isn't a dark romance, but the bad kind of stalker. And there is animal cruelty and animal death on page. And so just as a warning, but she basically escapes to Scotland to kind of hide away and hopefully have the stalker situation blow over. Well, when she finds out that he found her in Scotland, she has to come to her family or come to her friends and say, please help me. And so she ends up getting put into our hero's care. He lives alone in kind of this farmhouse. He's involved with the whiskey business that our hero from book 2 is involved in. And so it's really a cute, like, slow burn romance. Basically, she gets there ends up not being any chaperones, so there's some fun things with there being no chaperones. It was just a delight. I loved it. There is some suspense elements, obviously, because they're trying to find the stalker and prevent him from harming our heroine. So I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. Lisa Braden can do no wrong in historicals for me. Then I set up a NetGalley at the beginning of the month. This is a service that allows you to read books as advanced reader copies before final edits have come through or before the book is released to help build publicity for it. So I signed up for an arc of an Eve Langlais, I think it's Langlais book. I read my first book by this author at the end of September called A Nurse for the Wolfman. I talked about it at the end of September. It was, I think, a 4-star book, maybe 4.5 rounded down to 4. I can't quite remember, but it was pretty good. I was, up until the epilogue, I was in, and then there was a little thing in the epilogue that I didn't love. So I got an audio arc of a book called Earth's Daughter by the same author. And this is about our heroine who has some very mild magic. She basically doesn't have any super major magic because she wasn't recruited into a job that was primarily based in magic. She ends up having a bakery, and she kind of just bakes small spells into her goods. It's not actively advertised as magic, or I should say it's actively advertised as magic, but in a cheeky way. So if they are magically inclined, they know that there is actual magic involved with it, but the majority of her customers don't actually know. And necromancer starts raising zombies in her town, and so she gets thrown in with our hero, which is basically a zombie hunter, and it's his job to track down people who use magic inappropriately. It's very insta-lust and insta-love. And the overall story arc didn't make a lot of sense compared to some other paranormal style books that I've read. It had a lot of components where there were just some gaps in the overall arc. The relationship went too fast. It was also a very, very short book. I think the total length of the audiobook was only like 6 hours, which is pretty short for an audiobook. Generally, they average around 8 hours, 30 minutes, 9 hours, somewhere around there. So it was closer to novella length. It was fine. It was a 4-star read. Moving on. Then I read Tempting Auzed, which is Victoria Aveline's Clatians, book number 4. Again, this is one of my top favorites. This is our heroine, Alejandra. Alex escaped from the fertility facility and chose to run into the woods with our heroine from book 3. They get separated, and she basically almost drowns and has a strong concussion at the beginning of this book. And she basically gets this very adorable woodland creature, nurses her back to health, and like bonds with her. And so it's this adorable little creature that I can't even imagine what it looks like. But it's this cute little creature that helps her navigate life in the forest, and they start moving towards civilization. And our hero is one of the warriors tasked with helping track her down in the woods. And in the process, he actually trespasses on territory that he's not technically allowed to go on. And he comes across our heroine, who has gotten the attention of a major predator, and in order to save her, he kills the predator. But this predator is a sacred animal to the land, that the people of the land that he's trespassing on, and so they end up getting arrested together. And in order to be in a good position, she fakes a marriage, which this world has a unique concept of marriage. But she fakes a marriage intention to our hero so that he can have a less strict punishment. And then this land that they're on, their people are much more desperate and aren't willing to protect human women as much as other lands are, or other peoples are. I forgot to mention, this is an alien romance. Okay? That would have been an important thing to say. But I love this series. Absolutely great read. There were some nitpicky things at the end, which means this was a 4.5 star, but still a top favorite of the month. I love this author's alien romance. Okay. Next, I went and read Love Lies, which is book 3 in the Art Gallery series by Cynthia St. Aubin. I had those books on audio through Hoopla, and I kind of just was like, if I didn't know what to pick up, I would throw that audiobook on. So it was fine. It was a 4.5-star read. I struggle with this author and this series because there are times where at the beginning it's very slow and then the end is very rushed, and I feel a bit jerked around, and kind of by the end I'm kind of like, well, it wasn't that bad, but like each book I saw the same things happening over and over again, and I was getting more annoyed by it, and my like regard for each book kind of decreased. So it was a 4.5-star, it more like 4.25, honestly, but it's a 5 on Goodreads. Then I had another arc of Under a Wicked Moon by Zoe Forward. This is a paranormal romance that has a lot of action aspects to it. So this is book 2 in a series. Our hero gets sent on a mission where he's kind of like MI6 007 agent, and he gets sent on a mission where he's specifically supposed to be captured. And the mission goes wrong, and very early on we find out that someone betrayed him because he went into a situation that he should have been able to get out of, and the people who captured him were able to drug him and subdue him in a way that they weren't supposed to be able to, and so they clearly have a connection to or connection with the supernatural world that they're not supposed to have. This is book 2 in the series, so there was some major world building things that I'm not fully sure about, and it even might be a series that's a spin-off of something, so there were definitely components that I wasn't sure I understood. But it was a 4.5-star read. It was perfectly enjoyable. Our heroine has been in captivity for almost 2 months, and they end up keep throwing these 2 individuals together in captivity, hoping that they will breed together under Moonlust. They're both a variation of a werewolf-like creature, and so the moon makes them very horny. But the first time that they get put together, in addition to it being a full moon, she's in her heat, and there's only heat every 3 years, 4 years, something like that. So it's like this even more desire to get together, and our hero's the first one that has been able to truly resist the urge to mate, and so they don't actually have anything happen, and they're able to communicate with one another and build a rapport to one another because they keep seeing each other in captivity. And then they eventually escape, and that they have to figure out how to exist with one another. And the whole point of this people that have captured them is that they're not exactly sure what has been done to either of them, and there's a high probability that our heroine is a sleeper agent that can be activated with keyword phrases. Again, a lot of spy action movie elements in this series, so it was very interesting. I probably would go back and read the first book in the series and continue on with book 3, but I haven't yet. Then I was feeling a little paranormaled out because it was October. I was so excited to get to all the paranormal romance because, again, paranormal romance reader here. So I picked up Hearts in Darkness and Love in the Light, which is a duet by Laura Kaye. This is a story where the first book's a novella and then our second book's more like a full length. But we have our hero who is a bit standoffish. He has armored himself with tattoos and piercings as a way to kind of create a barrier from the outside world, and so he has kind of this stigma of he's not worthy. And our heroine's a very prim and proper kind of very just so type of heroine, and she's had a kind of rough week, and she's getting into the elevator at the end of the night. She's dropped her phone, and this is an older book, and so the phone battery has popped out, and her phone and her battery gets left outside an elevator, and she ends up stuck in an elevator with our hero in pitch black without emergency lighting because it's an older building. And so our hero kind of gets a glimpse of her to know that she's really like this prim and proper kind of girl or woman, and he's like, she'll never want someone like me. And the only thing that she sees of him is that he had a hand tattoo when he held the door for her, or held the elevator for her. And so they're trapped in the elevator for somewhat like 6 hours or something like that. And they have these really deep, insightful conversations without knowing what each other look like. And at the end of it, they want to start a relationship with each other despite their differences. And then it continues into their next book where they've been dating for a couple months, and how it's like for her to introduce him to her family, where they have some stigmas about people with tattoos, people with facial piercings, etc., and how really our hero's mental health is a thread that gets introduced in the first book with his anxiety in the elevator, and how the conversation between our hero and heroine actually started, and how that ties through, and how his mental health journey kind of progresses into book 2. So it was really hard hitting and emotional, and just, it's up there with a top epic romance for me. There were some things in book 2 that were a little cliche, or a little just not the way that I would have written it. So that one was more of a 4.5 star, but both are 5 stars on Goodreads, and I perfectly enjoyed that series. Then I wanted to finish up the Love Binds by Cynthia St. Aubin. This one I didn't have access to the audiobook, but it was on KU, so I read it through KU. And all of the things that I was frustrated about in book 1, in book 2, in book 3, happened in book 4. And at that point, I was sick and tired of it. So this was a 4-star read. It was an okay book. It was an okay book. But I just was frustrated where these things that I was hoping would improve upon just continue to not be addressed. Our hero and our heroine have this sexual tension and this like sexual chemistry that's just great. And then we never really see them build a relationship other than she likes to hound our hero for being a slob. That's the extent of their relationship. So we never really see interpersonal dynamics. We never really see her resolve any of her emotions about anything. It's like she all of a sudden has this like magical understanding of something. And especially at the end, this is going to be a bit of a spoiler, so if I remember, I'll put up a spoiler tag. But at the end, there's this whole thing about how our hero had a previous friend or relationship X number of hundreds of years ago, because he's a werewolf, and it was just a friendship, but he was willing to help this female friend get out of a horrible situation, an abusive marriage, and like he was willing to help, but he did not love this female friend in a romantic manner, and he was trying to help her, and she ends up committing suicide. I can't remember if she was pregnant or not, but she basically was mentally ill and very, very, very much struggling. And there's this whole thing where our heroine has been like being attacked by a ghost and like all these things. And the way that it ends is that she comes to the realization that this ghost is like actively haunting her and preventing her from ever to have children, and that even though she wants children so much, she'll never be able to have it. And it was just such an awkward martyr ending that didn't make sense, and how she was like this major leader of the paranormal community, and I didn't like how it ended. I really did not like how it ended. So that's the end of the spoiler stuff, but I will say there is trigger warning for violence and gore in this series. There is trigger warning for mental health stuff, and I believe suicide as well. And some degree of infertility and barrenness. I talk about it more in the spoiler section, but it was very confusing. I did not very much enjoy it. I was very disappointed at how it ended. This is probably more like a 3.5 star, and I doubt I will ever pick up something by Cynthia St. Aubin again, but I'll never say never. So then I just was wanting an audiobook, and I picked up Go Hex Yourself from, I believe, my library's Libby collection. This is by Clare. I believe this released about a year ago. This is a paranormal story where our heroine is very obsessed with like a Dungeons and Dragons style card game, or maybe Magic. I'm not very much into that scene, but one of those like power card type games. And she ends up answering a newspaper ad that she thinks is to work for the developer of that card game. And what we know is that this is actually an ad to work as a familiar to a witch / warlock. And so the ad in the newspaper was spelled so that people that had the magical abilities to be a familiar would be the only people to answer. And so it's this very weird juxtaposition and setup. It was very interesting, but it's a romance where our heroine and our hero are forced together with the situation, where they're forced to work together because they think that our heroine's boss and our hero's aunt has been put under a spell and is going to be basically a Sleeping Beauty type character, where she's going to starve herself to death in an unnatural coma. This one I have marked as a 4 on Goodreads. I think it was a 4.5. The overarching plot and the motivation of our characters to have to work together, I didn't love. I didn't love it. I liked the relationship between our hero and heroine. It went enemies to lovers a little disjointedly because there was a time jump in which during that time jump we have the majority of that relationship transformation, and so that was a little disjointed. Not my favorite book ever, but it was a solid audiobook. Then my 1 3-star of the month, and probably my biggest disappointment, is A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor by Kathryn Moon. And I think I talked about this in my October TBR because it was on my October TBR. This has been on my radar forever. And I have been a little hesitant of it because I wasn't convinced that I was going to love a Why Choose romance. I have never, this was my first Why Choose, and I had an inkling that I wasn't going to be an audience for Why Choose. They normally aren't like my first go-to, but I've loved monster romance and I've loved alien romance, and I've just loved it. So I figured this would be my entry point to see if I liked it or not. But Kathryn Moon, and this book in particular, is very character driven and very much not plot heavy. And that can be a good thing. But to me, it very much felt like a erotica novel that had no basis for why the sexual relationship is being built. So the premise is our heroine has been a maid or in service her entire life. She's has a bit of a sexual addiction that has impacted her employment in the past, and she's at one of her best jobs that she's had, and basically the family is desolate and they are selling off everything, and she gets approached by a doctor that treats noble women for their what's the real term, like the vapors or the hysteria or whatever it is. And so he approaches her to see if she would be interested in working at this place called Rooksgrave Manor. Well, the hero that approaches her is a Mr. Heckle, Dr. Heckle, Mr. Jive. What is it? A Heckle and Jive character. And so she quickly is introduced that this isn't a normal situation, that it's a paranormal situation, and she basically gets brought into this brothel that services monsters. And it felt like a lot of sex, and there were some characters that you could tell she had like put in effort into building a connection for, and that I was rooting for over others. But at the end of the day, I never got a full relationship of any of them with our heroine, and I didn't get a sense of them as a unit. There is sword crossing, there is a lot of polyamorous scenes, so like that is a factor. And I think the biggest thing that bugged me is that there was a very much a lack of consent discussion before each of these polyamorous scenes. There is some discussion about certain characters having already had certain sexual experiences with one another, but overall there was a lack of communication of consent from the reader's point of view. And even there's one of my favorite heroes from the story is a golem made of marble. So this is an artificial being created from marble. And how he gets introduced into this why choose romance honestly felt a little manipulative to me, because he didn't have full free will. Like, the course of the book is him separating from his maker and being bound to our heroine. And for him to be a part of any of these situations, and he's one of the main contributors to the polyamorous scenes, felt very nasty to me, because you have this creature with a half-formed will being pushed into sexual situations. As I said, I didn't love it. I even somewhat struggle to see why people enjoy it other than the smut. The smut is pretty good. If you like polyamorous scenes, which I'm going to say, they were hot scenes, but they didn't hit me emotionally. So take with that what you will, but I was major slumpy after reading this. So what do I do when I'm feeling slumpy? I find a novella. So I had seen a recommendation from Ava's Romance Books for this novella that's part of a world that a couple authors had written in, that is called The Wolf's Mail Order Bride by Goode. So in this, our heroine has been kind of a little down on her luck. She's just getting out of an abusive relationship, and she's been on her own for about 2 months, and she's basically been told that she's gotten notice that her ex has found where she is, and so she's basically leaving in the middle of the night so to speak. And because she's so desperate, she found a mail order bride situation, and she's basically, yes, like, take me in, like, get me away from here. And it's very interesting because it's a balance between she really needs to escape, but she doesn't want to bring the trouble with her. Well, the twist is that the hero that she has basically gone through an arranged marriage to is a werewolf alpha of a pack. And so he realizes that, or his subordinates bring her in hoping that she'll be his fated mate, and it ends up that she is. And there's some great conversation about how to introduce this world to a human and how her world fits in, and there's justice for the abusive ex. So it was very good. There's some violence, there's an abusive ex, but everything else is pretty good. I really enjoyed it. It's a very short novella, so if you're not expecting it to be the greatest thing ever, you might be disappointed. But for what it was, I highly enjoyed it, and I gave it 5 stars. Then I read After Midnight. This is another one of my favorites by Teresa Medeiros. And this one follows 3 sisters who are daughters of a deceased nobleman in England. I think it might be slightly before Regency. I can't quite remember. But their father was a nobleman, and both of their parents are deceased, and so they have this crude, gross relative that came out of the woodworks that ended up inheriting. And so they've been living kind of in this old and musty country house, giving a pittance. Like, they are not given like hardly any money to survive. And our primary heroine is the oldest daughter, or the oldest sister, and she has been basically raising her sisters. They were she was like around 16 or 17 when her parents died, and then the next youngest was more like 14 or 13, and then the next one was under 10. So her season got delayed because of the grieving process, and then by the time she was able to come out, they didn't have the financial situation for it, and so she's stepped aside. And the middle sister has finally come of age, and she's having her basically one and only season in London currently, and she writes home to say that she is enamored and probably going to get married to this lord. And the youngest sister is all up in arms because this lord has a reputation as potentially being a vampire. And our primary heroine, the oldest, is not really gonna believe that. But they do get invited to London to attend this dinner party, and this is an extravagant event. And basically our heroine has a meet cute with the lord that the middle sister has been courting with. And so it's very well done. It's not a love triangle in the least. It's very clear where the emotions lie. It's beautifully done. But there's this underlying of, so are they actually vampires? Is there something else going on? And it's slight spoiler, it is a paranormal historical romance, and I adored it. You have a HEA for the oldest sister and the middle sister in the book 1, with the middle sister being a secondary character, and then it gets set up for our youngest sister to be the heroine of book 3. So I really enjoyed it. 5 stars. Great. As I said, if you see my TBR video, the book 2 is on my TBR for November. Then I was still in novella mood, so I picked up Roses in Winter, which is a Beauty and the Beast retelling by Penelope Daniels. This was also Ava's Romance Books recommendation, I believe. This one, our heroine is married to an abusive husband, physically, emotionally, financially, etc., like bad dude. And so he's drinking at the tavern, and it is snowing out, and it's basically a blizzard's about to blow in. And so our heroine escapes on her husband's prized horse and gets into the woods, and she's trying to get back to her family who live in a different village. And she basically gets lost and comes across this castle in the woods that is derelict. And we have our hero, who is highly scarred. He was basically burned, and so he's very badly scarred and has been in hiding for years and years, and he's basically cursed that everyone has forgotten him. It was a very good read. It was a 4.5 star read for me that I read using Fejo, which is the Clatians book 5. This one follows our heroine Vanessa. I think it's Vanessa. And our hero Fejo. Vanessa has been desperately trying to get back to Earth, and we don't fully know why, except that she's left this horrible situation and she has to get back to her sister. And so she is desperate. And so we start out in a scene where she's shopping with some friends, and she's like, she's getting bogged down by the guilt and the frustration that she can't get back, and nothing is moving fast enough. And so she's just kind of putzing around and picks up this thing, and she's like, what's this? And she gets hit on by this guy she kind of is like, he's a pirate, and he has a man bun, and it's kind of just like a little, she's like, oh, that dude. But it's very funny because she is literally holding a vibrator, like an alien vibrator, and he basically offers his services in place of the vibrator. And so she's kind of like, oh, that dude. And he ends up giving her a gift of a vibrator that she does end up taking use of over the next couple of weeks. And then we flash forward, and she has this merchant dude that she is going to get into a 3-month marriage arrangement with. This planet has a unique concept of marriage where it's shortened periods of time that that females pick their partners because the planet has been devastated with infertility issues. And so she ends up targeting this specific merchant who can get her off of the planet that she's on, and hopefully she can escape and get back to Earth. And so she is very truly using this merchant dude to get back to Earth. And so she ends up finding out that it's the same dude as before, and it's a wonderful ride. They find out that they're fated mates. There's some great conflict because he unwillingly got into black market trading and has been trying to extricate himself from it. There's a lot of very interesting dynamics in it, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book in the series. It's up there with book 1 as a favorite. Then I'll be pretty quick about the next 3. I read 2 novellas that are also Beauty and the Beast retellings because I had really enjoyed the Wolf's Mail Order Bride that I read in the earlier in the month. So I was wondering if there was kind of a hint that potentially there was another couple that had a book that was also kind of in a novella in the same world, and so I went in search of it, and I found it. It's called Beauty and Summer, Beauty and Summer, and there happened to be it was part of an anthology, and so I ended up starting at the beginning, and the beginning is Beauty in Spring. This is by Wilde. This is a Beauty and Beast retelling where our heroine has used to work for the maintenance of a family's estate in England, and something happens and her father carts her away to the United States, and she's finished growing up in the United States. Her father has been ill and recently passed, and she was reached out by the parent, or by her father's old employers, to settle some things up, and they pay for her to fly back to England and to visit this old manor house. And so when she gets there, it's fallen into great disrepair, and basically her childhood sweetheart Gideon has been turned into a werewolf, and that was one of the reasons why her father carted her away. And we find this out pretty early, and so it's about him trying to convince her to stay with him, because when they were children, or when they were still young before she left, he asked her to marry her, or he asked her to marry him, and she said yes, and she has this necklace that was kind of a promise until he could buy her something nice until they got older. Well, as soon as she steps back onto the property, her necklace enchants and basically connects her to the house and prevents her from leaving. And so until and so the curse that he has is both, he is a werewolf, he has limitations in where he can go and what he can do, but the curse more implicates her, because she has to decide whether or not she can stay with him, but she's not going to stay until he gives her a choice to leave. And so it's very good, very enjoyable. I gave it 5 stars, and I really, really was impressed with the story. I'm going to definitely be checking out Kaye Wilde for more. Then I did Ella Goode, this was the book that I was originally interested in. This is Beauty in Summer. And in this one, it's very similar to the previous book, where our hero is an alpha werewolf, wolf shifter, leading a pack, and he's about to go insane. His wolf is pushing to the forefront because he hasn't found his mate, and the wolf wants control. And so he's having a hard time controlling his wolf, and so his subordinates try their best to find a mate for them. And they've tried multiple women shifters, or women werewolves, and the beta literally is out in the real world and smells our heroine, and it's like, I think she might be a mate material. And so basically, they buy off her parents to drop her off in the middle of nowhere under the guise of a job to introduce her to the mate. And there's a lot of fated mate mentality and insta-lust associated with it being a fated mate story. This one didn't work for me in the way that the previous novella worked, because it felt very much like insta-lust, that they were building a sexual relationship, and we didn't see any of their interpersonal relationships up until that point. Whereas I feel like the previous novella, we really got to see them work out who they were, and because our hero in the previous book had like built bookcases for her stuff and et cetera, we got to see where they had insight into each other's lives. This was pure carnal attraction. It was hot, but a little disappointing in the romance department, so it was 4 stars. And then lastly, I read Feral Sins by Suzanne Wright. I finished that this morning. And this was a bit of a disappointment as well. I've heard some people talk about how this series has elements that, I guess the polite way to say it, didn't age well. So in the story, our heroine is considered latent. This is a wolf shifter or werewolf that has never shifted fully into a wolf form. So she does have some ability to shift her hands into claws and her teeth into more fang-likes, but she's primarily working with the human structure, and she can't fully turn into a wolf. And so she is deemed as lesser, very similar to a person with a disability or a disabled person. And so overall, the first fourth of the book has highly abusive characters to our heroine. Her father is extremely abusive in word and deed. I don't think he's necessarily physically abusive, but very much emotionally abusive, neglectful of her as a child, etc., and uses her as a tool. Doesn't treat her as a person, but as a tool for her healing abilities, and really limits her interactions with the pack and with the other people as a whole because of her role as healer. And so overall, from the beginning, ableist language, abusive language, very yucky character that is our heroine's father. And then her father is highly politically motivated and has arranged a marriage or mating with an alpha of a pack that he wants to be aligned with. And this pack, this alpha, he's disgusting. He openly, first off, he forces a mate mark on her, like physically assaults her to bite her and mark her as his, which is written on page as akin to rape or as a form of rape. So again, lack of consent and physical assault, and repeatedly attempts to physically assault her, and she has to physically harm him to prevent it from happening. I think he almost attempts to rape her at one point too, and she stops him. So complete jerk and a-hole. And so not off to a great start. And she basically gets kidnapped by another alpha and is like, well, let's pretend to be true mates, so because you don't want to marry that jerk, and I need alliances, and I think if we do this, I can convince your dad to get on board. So it's a convenient situation, and they end up faking a true mating, a fated mate situation. And overarchingly, there's a thread of her latency as something to overcome or to in spite of, which is highly ableist. I know I am not disabled and I can't fully speak into that, but I'm trying to be more educated. And overall, I found that the language used to be highly ableist and to really not experience a ton of growth over the course of the book. There are some characters that are said to have growth, but I fully didn't see it. And then, like, she gets accepted into this pack structure, but she has this, our hero's grandmother is highly rude to our heroine throughout the entire book. And it's kind of like they're throwing jabs, but it didn't seem fun, and I didn't enjoy it. And I've heard that that's something that continues into the next book, and our heroine in this book is very spunky and can handle it. Still doesn't feel great, doesn't give me the warm and fuzzies, but she can handle it. And I've heard that into the next book that continues, and our heroine isn't as strong in that book. So, and then at the very end, in addition to throwing the surprise true mate bond in there, we have a surprise pregnancy in there. Which I don't mind a surprise pregnancy, except so many times when I read it, it's just kind of like one of those things that authors tend to throw in, and there's like been no discussion about children, or there's been no discussion of like, where do we see our family going? And part of the surprise pregnancy is that it's a surprise and you haven't had these discussions, but it didn't work. It didn't work. It was a 4-star read, probably less than that, probably a 3.5 star. I haven't fully thought on it long enough to solidify where I'm feeling, but kind of like the plot of the book was pretty good. It was pretty highly politically motivated, which isn't my preference. But overall, the plot was fine. It was just how our characters talked to one another really aged it. Because, let me look it up. March 2012. So it's about a decade old, which sometimes my mental brain is like, that's not that old, but also that's old. So it's about a decade old, and you can tell in the language, the discussions and the character, the verbiage, all of it just felt very dated and was something that I struggled to get past. And honestly, if I didn't have an audiobook to switch to, I probably would have DNF'd. This is on Kindle Unlimited for the free listen, not WhisperSync. Like, the true audiobook is available on KU. So if I didn't have the option to switch between the two, I probably would have DNF'd, because the audiobook was the only reason I got through it. So anyway, I feel like there was a lot of books that I ranted about this month, because this is a pretty long video for me. I did read a couple extra books, but this is definitely long for me. I hope y'all had an interesting reading month. I hope that you enjoyed all the books that you got to this month. Let me know what some of your favorites are. As I said, I really didn't want to rant this much, but there were some books that were just like really questionable for me that I didn't love. So, but there were some good ones too. So we distributed the good and the bad. But anyway, check out my November TBR. I'm participating in the Once Upon a Readathon. So I have some very interesting prompts and things that I'll be trying to do with my TBR for November, and I'd love for you to check it out. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you liked it, please do interact by liking it, commenting, subscribing, and I hopefully will see you in a video soon. And I can't wait to talk about the next read with you. Okay? Bye.